All right, let's take a trip way back in time. We're heading into a world of conquest, faith, and some really profound loss. We're going to uncover the origins of English literature. And let me tell you, this isn't a story that was written in some quiet, dusty library. Oh no. This story was forged in the fire of invasion and shaped by the biggest questions of the human heart. So, let's start with a little riddle. What could a tough-as-nails Viking warrior possibly have in common with a fancy French nobleman? Sounds like the beginning of a joke, right? But the answer is actually hiding in plain sight. It's in the very words I'm using to talk to you right now. You see, both of them, along with Anglo-Saxon settlers and Roman missionaries, left their mark on our language, shaping it everywhere from the battlefield to the courtroom. So let's dive into our first big idea, a language forged by invasion. We have to get one thing straight. English wasn't born peacefully, it was built. Think of it like a blacksmith's forge. It was hammered, beaten, and folded into existence over centuries of violent migration and culture clashes, all as different groups of people fought for control of one small island. This timeline here basically shows you the highlight reel of how it all went down. It kicks off way back in the 5th century. Germanic tribes, the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, they show up and bring the foundation of what we call Old English. Next, Christianity arrives, and with it comes the scholarly, formal language of Latin. But this is where things really heat up, the Viking invasions. For centuries, it's a constant clash. And then, the grand finale, 1066, the Norman conquest. French-speaking rulers take charge. Every single one of these events is another layer troweled onto the language, adding new words, new sounds, and new ideas. And you can literally see this history in our vocabulary today. It's amazing. Our most basic everyday words, the words for family and life, man, child, eat, that's all from Old English. The Vikings, they gave us gritty, practical words like sky, knife, and egg. Then the Normans show up, and they bring the language of power and control, words like judge, jury, parliament. And the church gives us the language of learning and faith from Latin, like scripture and angel. Our dictionary is basically a history book, page by page. Okay, so once this new, mashed-up language starts to take shape, what do people do with it? Well, they start telling stories. And those first stories are driven by two massive and kind of competing forces. On one side, the absolute certainty of religious faith, and on the other, these incredibly deep, personal feelings of fate and loss. So on one hand, you have the religious voice. This makes perfect sense, right? The clergy in the monasteries were pretty much the only people who could read and write. So their whole goal was to educate, to inspire, to spread the Christian faith. It was a communal voice. But then you get this other voice bubbling up, and it's completely different. It's personal. It explores loneliness, exile, the harshness of the world. This voice isn't trying to save society, it's just trying to capture what it feels like to survive as one person. And just look at the creativity of that religious voice. In one incredible early poem, The Dream of the Rood, the story of the crucifixion isn't told by a person at all. No, it's told from the perspective of the cross itself, the actual wood. It talks about its pain, its sense of duty as it holds Christ. I mean, what an incredibly powerful and imaginative idea. Then you flip the coin completely. You get poems like The Wanderer. These are called elegies, which is just a fancy name for poems of mourning. And this isn't about salvation or the good of mankind. Nope, this is about survival. It's the voice of an exiled warrior who's lost everyone, his lord, his family, his home, everything. It's just a raw, intimate look at personal suffering, a feeling that is, well, absolutely timeless. And this focus on personal feeling, it signals a huge shift in storytelling. We start to see a move away from tales about tribes and gods and entire communities and toward a new, pretty radical focus on the individual, the single person's journey, their inner life, and their own identity. The academic term for this is individualism, but really, all it means is that literature starts to zoom in from the wide shot of the group to a close-up on one person. It's about celebrating one person's incredible achievements or exploring their unique feelings. It's about charting a personal path, whether that's on a battlefield or inside your own soul. The I was starting to matter more than the we. And this individualism came in a few different flavors. You had the heroic kind, right? Think Beowulf. It's all about the singular courage of one guy against the monsters. Then you had that personal individualism we just saw, the kind that explores all the feelings of suffering and loneliness. And then there was this new kind of spiritual individualism, which was less about the rules of the church and more about developing a direct one-on-one relationship with God. Now, it's really important to remember something here. For centuries, pretty much every single voice we have from this time, the heroes, the priests, the lonely wanderers, they were all men. It was a total boys' club. But in this new world of personal spiritual reflection, a door was starting to creak open. And through that door came two absolute pioneers. You have Julian of Norwich, a mystic who wrote one of the earliest books by an Englishwoman that we still have today. And then there's Margery Kempe. And get this, her book is considered one of the very first autobiographies in the English language. She didn't just write about faith, she wrote about her faith, her life, her visions. They weren't just writing as women, they were helping to invent the whole idea of writing about yourself. So all these early sparks of creativity, from epic poems to these deeply personal visions, they all laid the groundwork for a few monumental figures who would take this still evolving language and turn it into a true literary tradition. And the most famous, of course, is Geoffrey Chaucer. I mean, they don't call him the father of English literature for nothing. With the Canterbury Tales, he did something absolutely revolutionary. He wrote about all classes of society, from knights all the way down to cooks, in their own voices. And he did it using the English of the common people, what we call Middle English, proving once and for all that it could be just as beautiful and powerful as fancy French or scholarly Latin. So you can see this really clear progression, like they're building on each other's work. It starts with someone like the Venerable Bede, who's basically just documenting history and faith. Then William Langland comes along and uses stories to critique society. Then Chaucer just blows the doors open and captures society as it actually was, in all its messy, wonderful glory. And finally, Sir Thomas Malory gathers up all the great myths of King Arthur, giving the English-speaking world its own legendary past. Each one passed the baton to the next. So, after all that, after traveling through centuries of invasions and poems and prayers, you gotta ask, why does any of this ancient history matter today? Well, the answer is pretty simple. We are living inside of it. Every single time you speak, you are using a language that was built by soldiers and monks and poets. The words themselves are like tiny fossils. Each one carries the DNA of every historical event and every human emotion we've talked about. That conflict, that faith, the loneliness, the search for who we are, it's all baked right into modern English. And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. The English language was forged by these massive, powerful forces of its time: invasion, conquest, religion. So it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the great forces shaping our language right now? The internet? Social media? Technology? What will people 1,000 years from now say was the story of our words?